see the red light.
Okay. I'd like to bring the meeting of January 7th to order, asking if anybody besides LCAT is recording this meeting.
Shirley Tancraft for the minutes.
Okay. And we're going to go review the operating budget.
Thank you. Most of the material that I want to review with the board tonight, we saw at the last meeting, so I won't go into great detail. I will call attention to changes and let the board know that my goal tonight is to have the board approve the final operating budget. I have also presented information to get the board starting to thinking about the revenue side of the equation in terms of where the money is going to come from this year. I'm not looking for approval of that today. It's really just putting some information in front of you to start thinking about that tonight. So looking through the package that I put together for the operating budget, again, I'll call out the new items. One of the new items I put in this package was a spreadsheet that I developed with Mr. Burak last year when we started looking at the enterprise fund and taking a look at the trends in terms of how we have allocated the cost of staff across the 4 divisions within the DPW over the past 10 plus years. Because we were trying to get a sense of historically how have the various divisions carried costs within each division. And it became apparent here that over time we shifted costs out of the highway division into the water and sewer divisions and looked at if we're going to be taking a look at creating a water and sewer enterprise fund. Now is the time to really take a look at how we allocate those costs and make certain that we do it in a fair and a responsible manner going forward.
Yep.
One graphic I put together that I should have put together last time we got together was really just identifying what the staffing allocation currently is, and that's what the next sheet is, really indicating the current staffing allocation by division and how we allocate the shared salaries, which are currently just the superintendent and the operations manager. Then the next graphic is what the board saw at the previous meeting, where I got into a much more complicated discussion of how we would be looking to reallocate and redistribute some of the costs between divisions. So this spreadsheet, other than the boxes that I put in the bottom that really kind of gives a narrative description of the shared costs, is unchanged from what we looked at previously.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, within each of the division budgets, the only things that have changed I've highlighted in yellow, so you can see in the first budget, which is for the building division, I've indicated that to be final, or my intent is for that to be final and hopefully approved by the board tonight. Nothing has changed from what the board saw previously. The next budget is titled Administration, but it's really what we call the highway budget. It's Division Department 421. The only thing that changed there was in working with the town accountant, we had historically carried all the longevity pay for the shared staff people in the highway division budget. And she appropriately indicated that if we're going to apportion salary, we should also apportion the longevity costs. So you'll see in the individual budgets between the water and sewer and highway that there's some small changes because of the way the longevity costs are apportioned.
Okay. That makes sense.
So moving on to the sewer enterprise fund budget, you'll see I've highlighted 5 lines. The first line is the longevity budget that I just spoke about. The following 4 lines are the employee benefit lines that are new numbers. I had presented some placeholders really last time we got together, but these are the latest numbers that the town accountant was able to produce yesterday in terms of estimates of what Medicaid costs, workman compensation costs would be, health insurance and retirement contributions would be for the employees or that are either assigned in whole or in part to the sewer division.
Okay.
The next sheet shows the snow and ice budget, and again, there's no change there. I will note that that's one of the budgets that we are proposing after some discussion with at least one member of the Appropriations Committee, a fairly significant change in terms of how we budget for at least a portion of those costs. We'll wait to see what the Appropriations Committee says, whether or not it's an agreement in terms of how those costs get carried. The budget, just to note, is still probably underfunded from what our actual costs would be even in a very optimistic year and during a very difficult year, it's significantly underfunded. Waste collection and disposal, again, no change from last month. Water enterprise fund, again, the same trend that you saw in the sewer fund, in that I adjusted longevity numbers a little bit, and then I added the latest estimates of what the employee benefit cost would be based on input from the town accountant. And for your information, we're getting to it as I have an overall summary of all the budgets put together, which I think is probably going to be most helpful to the board. The next budget item is the utility budget item, again unchanged from last meeting and unchanged from last year, based on what we believe will be happening looking forward. The summary of how we are looking to reallocate some of the expenses within the divisions, between the various divisions, is unchanged from last month. Again, in addition to shifting some employee costs between divisions, we're shifting expenses such as fuel costs, a portion of the fuel costs and a portion of the vehicle repair costs from the highway division to the water and sewer divisions. I then put together a spreadsheet, or updated spreadsheet, that the board has seen several times in past years, which is a overall tabulation of this year's budget as well as the previous couple of years' budget. And I'll note that what I did was I presented two versions of this spreadsheet. I presented one version that matches exactly the previous budget sheets, and that's again the first sheet. And then I presented a variation of that where I took out the new costs that we're incurring this year that we have not incurred in previous years. I took out the employee benefit costs, I took out the additional snow costs, and then took a look at what that total budget would look like. And as you would expect, the increase that we are seeing in this year's budget is very heavily driven by the shifting of employee costs into the water and sewer budgets. That's really the primary factor that we're looking at across the entire department, a 5% increase, primarily from reallocation of costs from what have been general fund costs to water and sewer enterprise fund costs.
Okay, makes sense. So by comparison between the summary spreadsheets, the first one that has everything in there as we have it presented for this year shows, as I said, a 5% increase. If I take out the new costs from this year, we're down to a 0.9% increase. And I will note that these budgets at this point do not include any salary adjustments for any new contracts or renegotiated contracts that might be coming up to cover fiscal 16. That's not in there.
That is not in there, correct. It's, as we get into this in another year or two, it'll be a lot simpler. This year, there's a lot of moving pieces and parts in terms of how budgets get shifted, so it's difficult to see trends when so many things have shifted.
Okay.
So really, this is the operating budget discussion. I think what makes the most sense is to then ask you to look at the very last two pages of your package. And the reason I ask you to do so is we've talked about in concept in the past The water and sewer enterprise fund budgets will be presented as a standalone budget, standalone article at town meeting this upcoming May. And what we will be showing is we'll be showing both the sources of both the expenses and the sources of revenue. So I wanted to give you a prototype that I've worked through with the town accountant. These numbers I expect will change somewhat, but the format I don't expect will change significantly. So the upper portion basically is a motion that appropriates funds for the sewer enterprise fund in the first example based on revenue sources including user charges, interest on retained earnings, betterment fees that get collected for previous sewer projects where betterments were assessed, and connection fees that historically have been collected for new connections. That's what will fund the budget. The expense side of the budget is what we've stepped through in detail at the last meeting. There's the personnel services, there's the operating expenses, there's our debt service, there's any current capital that is in that current year's budget. And then there are two items that will vary depending on which direction the budget is tracked, or the funds are tracking. If you're in a year where you're collecting more revenue than expenses, you'll show a budget surplus under the expense item. If you're in a year where you expect to have to use retained earnings as a source of revenue, then there'd be a retained earnings line that would make the expenses and the revenue balance. And you can see in this example that I've presented, I'm showing that we'd be using retained earnings in order to fund the budget for the year.
And we'll see the balance on a separate sheet.
You'll see the
We're
balance.
setting rates. Is that the
That's
idea?
correct. And if you want to step back a couple of sheets, you'll see a sheet that looks very similar to what I put together last, I think it was April or May, when we were talking about rate setting.
Yep.
And what I've done is I've taken that sheet and I've incorporated fiscal 16 numbers there. And I'm really looking for you to understand the concepts today, not looking to present any recommendations regarding rates at this meeting. But I've taken the very same approach with one slight variation. First, I estimate expenses. I did add one line item to the estimated expenses. Now that we will be funding our own vehicles, it makes sense to fund, unless we want to purchase vehicles on a calendar year basis and fund the entire cost of the vehicle in a calendar year. Particularly for some of our larger pieces of equipment, it makes sense to put money aside on an annual basis to be able to absorb what could be a $200,000 bill in 1 year. So I've added a line item in this expense budget that would be an annual vehicle replacement cost that would allow us to accumulate revenue over multiple years to then purchase a vehicle at some later date.
Yeah, I looked at that today with Bob, and I just think that 20,000 is not enough. But he came to buy a pickup truck with $20,000, and when we get we're gonna have a loader, we're gonna have a backhoe, we're gonna have at least one dump truck that's gonna fall into it. We're gonna have, I mean, $20,000 is not, it's not gonna be enough to accumulate any kind of money. 5 years, it's gonna take you 10 years just to do one piece of equipment, a big piece of equipment. So,
I could concur with that.
yeah. The other thing I talked about a lot is the fact that, if we buy something like this, we're gonna have to probably bond it on something big. And he and I looked at some of the numbers as what's coming off, what's being paid off, and because we've got some gaps in there.
What's currently going to be in there for equipment?
What's going to be in?
We made up a list.
You got a list?
Yeah, we do have a list.
All the equipment that is going to be transferred over to each department
Right.
and be responsible for.
Well, we can make that adjustment when we set the water rates and the sewer rates by plugging in a different
Correct.
number there.
Largely what I want to do is put the concept out there.
Right.
Yeah, makes
And
sense.
anything in this spreadsheet can be changed and manipulated. Any assumptions that are made can be, made less conservative, more conservative as we go forward.
A number I just picked out of the air was like 50,000.
Probably more realistic.
and then the rest of it could be bonded. We can use some of that for some purchases, but we're gonna be looking at a loader and a backhoe and a dump truck, because our dump truck should.
You know, the question will come up, what impact, so I took a look at it, what impact will the shifting employee benefit costs to the water and sewer funds have on the rates? And it will be a little bit less on the water rates because the water budget is greater, and a little bit, percentage-wise, a little bit more in the sewer budget, or because the budget is lower, but it's averaging about 15 cents per unit is the impact of shifting those costs. So it would be, you know, going from 265 to 280 would be necessary just to cover the shifting in costs.
Just the benefit package.
That's correct.
Yeah, not counting this equipment.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so the second sheet in this package is then, if we estimate what the expenses are going to be, and we estimate what's in the bank, what's available for a starting balance in the fund, and how do we want to draw that balance down. And as I mentioned in the summary, you know, the example I have right now shows that we're using retained earnings to balance the budget, bringing the balance in our fund down. And the decision that'll have to get made is, you know, what number do we feel comfortable targeting for balance? Recognizing that the balance in the water fund and the sewer fund is really there for three purposes. One is long-term capital purchases. Again, if we're looking at trying to fund the purchase of a new front-end loader or a new backhoe, that's the money in the bank that's going to pay for that. Secondly, to cover any sort of emergency repairs that come up in the year that aren't anticipated, since we will no longer have the benefit of being able to tap into free cash as basically as our bank. The bank that we can tap into will be our own water and sewer fund that would be available for unanticipated expenses during the year. And then lastly, really to buffer the effect of the variation in revenue that we have year to year. You know, we see, as we've talked about before, as much as a 20 or 25% difference in revenue between a very wet year and a very dry year. And without having a buffer there, we could end up in a situation where we don't have enough funds to get through the year. Because we can't anticipate what the weather's going to be like when we set the budget. So this gives you, a general sense, again, without any additional raises, without any raises for fiscal 16 built into the water and sewer fund. They won't have a huge impact on the fund, as much as they will in the highway fund, the highway division, because the highway division proportionally carries much more labor versus expenses. The water and sewer funds, primarily because of the payments that we have on principal interest and the payments that we make to the Springfield Water and Sewer Commission, about 2/3 of those budgets are strictly expenses and about 1/3 is labor. In the highway division, our expenses proportionally are much lower.
Do you think connection fees and betterments are going to maintain? Because we've had some decent-sized neighborhoods go in that would have driven those numbers. Are there that many more neighborhoods left to go in? Because that number might taper.
It will, over time, I would expect. I've looked over 2 years. I haven't been able to go back historically, look over. I suspect in 08 and 09 it probably was less than last year, and it picked probably back up a little bit last year. But yeah, it can't continue.
But some of the Great Woods and the turkey farms and all that property is now all built, right?
Wasn't what you're talking about increasing that rate at one point?
Yeah.
The connection fee.
Yeah.
I thought about that, but I mean, not talking about that, but I mean, I thought we should get into some bonding, but I don't.
Right, and that's another discussion. Right now, for
Yeah,
instance,
but that's not
in the
gonna
water
affect us.
fund, I'm showing everything, well, out 3 years, we have a significant project that we're put on the radar screen, about $1 million project extending a new water main down Maple Street. Obviously, we couldn't carry that in a single year. So
Right.
my analysis shows that being, I think 25% of that being paid in the first year and the balance being bonded over 10 years. We may even want to consider bonding some of the other improvements and stretching them out a little bit. But we're, as you can see, we're carrying significant P&I now. And bonding only adds further to that. So generally, if we can pay as we go, that's generally the better approach, even though, well, right now interest rates are still pretty low. From what the town clerk was telling me today, right now he's anticipating a 15-year note he can get at about 2.25% interest. So that'll change someday, but Right now, it's
Right now, it's pretty.
not a major cost.
So in theory, we should do as much as we can while the rates are still low.
Right. In fact, he and I were talking about, he's looking to refinance some debt that goes back a number of years right now, and I think he's looking at in the 1% range, for some of the refinance debt.
Really?
Yeah.
So the question is, does Maple Street get accelerated, even though it may take 2 years to get it completed, or 3, do we get the funding and get it going? So you capitalize on that rate, because if it goes to 5%, it's a big difference.
Yeah, it's a trade-off. What I've been thinking about on Maple Street is that we have a street that's in relatively good condition. And this argument goes counter to your argument, but is perhaps even deferring that longer, so we let the life of the street degrade a little bit more before we go and tear up Maple Street. Because once we do it, we'll do a complete repave of Maple Street.
But when we commit and bond, we don't have a timeline to finish it, right?
You have to spend it first, I thought.
No.
Most, as I understand, most bonding agencies are looking for a timeline. In fact, that was one of the discussions I had with the town clerk today on the refi, was identifying which projects had been closed out and what funds were no longer necessary from previous bonded articles.
But do you start with the engineering and then it doesn't quite go as fast? I'm just saying, is there a time-money difference
Perhaps.
rate that, not that you jump it, but take some advantage of it
Usually,
while
I
it's low?
thought what they did was they...
Some projects take us 5 years.
Right, but I
sometimes.
think what they do is they use the short-term borrowing as we go along, and then once the project is complete,
Correct.
that's when they bundle it with some other projects.
That's, yeah, using the short term, you don't lock in your long-term rate. So the question will be, how much time would you need to like do things before you really could take down the whole amount?
I get
Because
it.
that's where you're
I
gonna
get it, I get it.
get your advantage.
It's worth a discussion. I know in that example of short-term, that's what we did with the Harkness pumping station. For instance, that's still under a short-term note right now. That hasn't been rolled into a long-term.
How many
Sooner is
feet,
better than that, probably.
Yeah,
how many feet of line
It's not
is
gonna stay
that?
this way forever.
March, they're talking March, it's gonna stay changing.
I didn't bring the capital budget with me today.
And,
Unfortunately, I hesitate to guess because I'd come up with the wrong guess.
Yeah, what size line is there
I
now?
believe, I think it's an 8-inch line, but again,
You wanna pick it up?
we were looking to pick, it's part of,
To like
we've done a
12?
pretty good job of looping most of our main corridors in town, and that's about the last main corridor that
What
hasn't been
would you
upgraded.
increase it to, a 12? or-
Probably a 12, I believe, is generally where we've gone with. So it's worth trading one against the other, is really what the best answer is.
Going back to the sewer,
$200,000 balance.
the current rate is 255,
That's correct.
and you're proposing, at least in here for projections, increasing that to 270.
That's the 15 cents to cover.
That's 15 cents anyway.
Right,
Yeah.
right, and that's still gonna bring us down
To 289.
significantly by $489,000.
Correct,
So
correct.
We might have to even go up
Right.
above that. After that, it seems to stay pretty stable. This is the first.
Yeah, but the
Yeah, but
15
we went up
cents,
35 cents the next year.
Yeah.
See
the
it?
the 15 cents that he
But,
brought it
yeah,
up
but I mean, we might have to get close to that the first year.
isn't even covering.
Depends on the balance.
What we wanna do with bringing the vehicle out.
Right. So if you change the 1935 by saying 50, you gotta take 30 more. So, and that we'll do in April, right? That's the plan for that?
I think so.
That rate
That's-
gets set April.
At this point, I'm not certain that appropriation or anyone has really thought about the revenue side of that equation. And rate setting is clearly, entirely up to the Board of Public Works. At some point, this article has to be reviewed and endorsed, I think, by all the property appropriations and Board of Public Works and Board of Selectmen before it goes to town meeting. So, yeah, at some point, everybody will need to see this article, which means we need to have rates.
So that 270 needs to be set before town meeting now? Before the recommendation?
In my mind, it should be, because if not, it's speculative that the revenue,
So April's gonna be a little late.
April could be a little late, March
So we
might
just
be
have to
better.
maybe move it. It's always been April in my mind.
Yeah,
So we might have to do our rate setting in February or March.
right,
I'm okay with that. We
Early
just-
March.
yeah.
And then that'll set the 270 or something, right?
Right.
And the 285 or something. on the water side. Okay,
So I think in general, these numbers are fairly hard, as hard as estimates can be. I guess I'll put it at that point. I don't expect them to change dramatically. I've gone through a fair amount of effort with the town accountant in terms of looking at what all the real principal and interest costs are and what the employee costs are, so I don't expect any more new information to be available. Yes, back to the operating budget, I'd request that the board act on a motion to approve the operating budget so we can submit that to appropriations by the 13th.
I'll make a motion to approve the fiscal year 2016 operating budget effective our report of January 7, 2015.
That's the way I want the motion.
That would be fine.
Okay, second.
All in favor?
Further discussion?
Any further discussion?
Good to
All
go.
in favor?
Aye. Okay.
Staying on budget for just a second, I'll note for the board's benefit that I learned late this afternoon that the Appropriations Committee has a meeting on next Tuesday, the 13th at 6 p.m. And one of the items that they will be discussing are the enterprise funds. And I believe the Board of Selectmen has posted that as a Board of Selectmen meeting as well. They have continued to take the joint board policy under advisement, but they were, as I understand, they were really looking to find out what the real numbers are. What are the employee costs that are going to be included with the enterprise fund?
What time, where?
Is that at Council on Aging or?
It's typically at the Council on Aging. I haven't got a notice of it yet,
Okay.
so.
The 13th at 6.
And if it would be 6, it would be because the selectmen have asked to have it at 6. Our typical time is 6:30, so.
Okay.
We can confirm.
Sure.
for you.
What'd you say, the 13th?
Yeah.
The town administrator was thinking your regular meetings are at 6, so he may have been maybe 6:30 then. And I expect probably to spend some time walking them through, because I think it's going to be educational, as I've sat down with Mr. Broderick, to kind of go through, this is what the enterprise fund does to the DPW budget. These are the costs that used to be carried in the general fund that are going to be shifted to the general fund, just shifted to the water and sewer funds. Here are some costs that, when we're rebalancing, that perhaps get shifted back. But, you know, without a doubt, the majority of the costs are getting shifted into the water and sewer funds. So we can post that as a Board of Public Works meeting as well, if
Probably
if
should
the
for
full board
safety's
feels.
sake,
Okay,
yeah.
Yeah.
I can get there, so.
You want, with this signed right here, Bob?
please. And the only last item I want to mention in the budget was, is that we start taking a look at the water revenue and water expenses looking forward into the future. One item I've not received yet is an updated projection from the Springfield Water and Sewer Commission. As I think, as I've told board members in the past, they have pushed their projections back a year, which is good news for us, that we're not seeing the increase this year that we thought we were going to see increase. But they have told me that they expect that's just going to be a temporary deferral of costs, but they have yet to give me any numbers to show what they think next year and the year after might look like. So they have told me earlier this month I should be getting it, so hopefully by the time we're rate setting, we'll have a little bit better understanding of what
They're
their
gonna
costs
be
look
looking
like
to
in the
be.
next 4 or 5 years. Okay, moving ahead at this point, I just want to cover a couple of other items very quickly. Our annual statistical report, which is the report that goes into Mass DEP regarding a water system operation and statistics and how much we pumped and how much water we lose through leaks and things like that, is due in on March 2nd, so I'll be working on that over the next month or so. We have a deadline of January 30th to get our department reported to the town report, so I expect at our next board meeting, we'll be presenting a draft of that for your endorsement.
In the past, they've been emailed, so we can peek them
Look at them
a couple
first.
days
Okay.
ahead, so
We'll
if
do
that's
so.
possible,
Okay.
rather than read them together here.
Yep. One change for the positive from a cost standpoint is that we have, as of this week, cut down staffing at our water pumping stations to 5 days per week. We had at one point been staffing those stations on a Saturday and Sunday basis. I previously talked about how we were cutting 1 day of the week out of that because Mass DEP had determined that that's part of our distribution system. It does not fall into the treatment staffing regulations. We have tried that for a couple of weeks, a couple of months. It's worked fine with 6 days a week. We've made some changes to our SCADA system that allows us to collect additional data remotely, so we're going to be backing off to 5 days per week as of this week.
Awesome.
And that'll be about $100 per week savings in overtime charges that we'll realize. You know, when we get into the peak summertime condition, I may make a change to go back to 6 days a week, or maybe even 7 during the real critical times of year, but at this time of year, there's no need for us to be out there 7 days a week.
Awesome.
We had one water break, as the board may be aware, water main break of December 23rd, early morning. Staff responded to it, had things well underway, so that when we had our regular crews on board first thing in the morning, we were able to get everything back in service. It was about 10 a.m. that morning. It was an 8-inch AC main, asbestos cement main. Typical cause of break in that it's in a low-lying area where your pressures are the highest in the system, and it occurred during the middle of the night where you see your highest pressures as well, is because that's when people use the least amount of water, so the pressures tend to build up more
Get a
and more during
spike.
the nighttime. So most likely we received some sort of a spike, and we had one small section that popped out. Took about a dozen customers out of service.
Where was it?
Cooley Street.
Oh, yeah. You know about that.
Yeah, it's right across the street.
Okay,
Across the street from my house.
got it.
All right.
Let's see. I sent out to the board a week or two ago the results of a inspection that the Mass DEP had done on our wastewater pumping stations, and they put a report together. And as I indicated in my email, there weren't any real big surprises in that.
Yep.
One item I did want to call out is that as part of the regulations that we're now brought underneath, that I talked about relative to having to focus more on infiltration and inflow removal work, for instance, in the future, we are also, by regulation, we're supposed to visit every wastewater pumping station 7 days a week, if you believe that. In their letter, they noted that they expected that we would apply for a waiver of that, and there's a procedure to go through and apply for a waiver. They were suggesting 5 days a week. We're likely going to suggest a much less frequent inspection period, and really take advantage of our automation and electronic monitoring systems to inspect every station 5 days a week electronically, but to physically visit the stations when necessary. You know, if you think the time that it takes to visit 18 pumping stations 5 days a week, you know, you're taking half of a man week or 3/4 of a man week just driving around to physically put your eyes on something, versus taking that same manpower and putting that manpower into preventative maintenance to make certain that the pumping stations don't have problems. So we're going to make that argument that we can do that inspection remotely, as opposed to having to physically be on the ground to inspect things that we know work very well, that don't need to be looked at every day.
How many cameras do we actually have in play at these? Some of them, like the bigger
The
pump
larger
stations?
stations we do at Chestnut Street, the water pumping station we have on the outside of the Harkness water pumping station. We don't have on the inside of the water pumping station. Vineland, I don't believe we have any cameras inside.
No, exterior only.
Exterior only. So, and most of our stations are mid-sized to small stations, but the things that we can inspect remotely are levels, pump condition, pump status, things like we can,
Right.
you know, verify
They're
that
all
everything is
hooked up.
turning, everything's
Right.
doing what it's supposed to be doing, and that's really the most important thing.
And I think the statute's probably outdated. This is
Oh, I'm sure.
probably-
No, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Before electronics was.
I just wondered, too,
wasn't
if
thought about, so.
The cost of cameras has come so far down as
Right.
well. So part of the argument might be if they really want a visual,
Right.
you know, we could entertain some potentially a few more cameras.
I think it's
They're so
more the
cheap.
SCADA, just making
Understand.
sure that the
Yep.
floats are working, everything, the pumps are working,
Right.
everything, we get the alarms, and everything is monitored. And
I agree.
I'm sure some communities don't have that, so they have to go out just to check, make sure that nothing is pumping.
Not flowing down the street.
Right. A couple of other items, I wanted to note that Ryan Daly is back on staff for a couple of weeks during Christmas break. And we're put him to work doing a number of things that we think are going to help us going forward. We're creating a electronic database, and a GIS-based database of all our pavement improvement projects going back the past 10 years, including, for instance, this year where we went out and, as you might know, we spot milled and patched a number of locations. We've now actually GPS'd each one of those locations, so we have them in a database. We can keep an eye on them to see if they last a year, 5 years, 10 years, and start getting a better handle on how some of our previous improvements are performing and how long they last.
Awesome.
We're looking at the same type of thing on new streets, so we're entering in all the ages of our new streets over the past 10 years. We probably won't go back a lot further than that, but we certainly can capture the year of construction of some of our newer subdivisions.
What do you think's gonna happen with the price of asphalt, with the price of gas and oil? That's a long time, because plants won't be open for...
Asphalt has been stable amazingly for the last year and a half, 2 years. A little hard to say because it's
I don't think it's gonna go down.
it's likely not going to go down
No.
significantly. I don't think that the raw product is that much of a piece of the total cost of installed asphalt, but I don't expect it to go up. You know, there was a point in time 3-4
Yeah.
years ago
I agree.
where every year asphalt was going
going
up
up.
at 10 or 15% a year, and that hasn't happened for a couple of years now.
I think it'll probably stay stable
Right.
and not go down.
Would be my guess, yeah, as well. We're also, we've digitized all the water main breaks over the past 10 years, so we've got all that information in the database now, where we know where the breaks are, we know what types of breaks they were, and we can pull all that map, all of that up on a GIS system and, you know, get a visual, you know, picture of what's been happening in addition to just having things on a piece of paper and a list. And we're doing the same type of thing on some of our sewer maintenance activities where we've had to go back and repeatedly jet areas or repeatedly clean grease out of areas. We're trying to capture all that within the database and then maintain that database going forward.
This may be a silly question, but is there such a thing as balancing the pressure by doing anything with either devices or changes in pitches or elevation? I mean, it might be a silly question, but if Cooley Avenue is a
Sure.
high-pressure area
Right.
and we get a break or two, is there any way to mitigate that pressure in that evening hour by mechanically doing something, or it's just...
You can, if pressures are excessive, you can put in pressure-reducing valves. And, you know, generally you're looking at areas where you might have pressures over 100, over 125 PSI, that type of level is where you typically start putting in a pressure-reducing valve. It's another item to maintain, another thing to fail. When they fail, all of a sudden you get a worse spike because you've been controlling the pressure and all of a sudden it spikes up high. That Cooley Street is on our low-pressure side of the town, so it's fed directly from Springfield. So it's not something that, other than putting in pressure-reducing valves, it's not a lot of things that we, you know, we
I
can
was just
control
curious,
directly.
not having the knowledge
I don't
of
think
it.
the pressure's that high right there, is
It's
it?
not really, it's not that high, but it's just enough. When you get, particularly old water systems that have fragile pipe, they don't like changes.
No.
So if it used to be 80 and it goes to 85, that's a change. All of a sudden, something happens. If it used to be 100 and it goes to 100, it's not the absolute pressure many times, it's just the fact that something has
Something
changed
changed.
beyond what it
Which-
typically is seen and typically has, you know, worked well under, that when you start to see problems come up.
Good enough.
I may just, if the board doesn't mind, I have to step out of here in about a quarter of or so, so I wasn't going to talk as long as I did, but I did want to mention 2 other items, then I'll let Mr. Fenny take over. This winter, I've identified 3 staff training opportunities that I'm making available to a select number of staff people. In fact, I'm looking for volunteers. One is pesticide applicator licensing. We don't currently have a pesticide applicator on staff. We need to have at least 1, probably 2 on staff, and some training opportunities are coming available. So we're taking a look right now at, you know, what staff people would be best, you know, suited to take that training. I am making it clear that we'll be providing these training opportunities on a reimbursement based only. You know, it's an opportunity for the employee to improve themselves as well as to improve the department, but we need to make certain that their head is in the game. So we're not going to pay for the courses, the cost of the courses up front, but we'll pay the employee for the cost of the courses retroactively, assuming they pass the course and they obtain the license. So there's an incentive for the employee to be there and to really be engaged.
Okay.
We're also taking a look at providing some redundancy for our cross-connection inspector. We currently have 1 cross-connection inspector in town, and it would be beneficial to have a backup to that person, not a new position, but somebody within the skilled worker pool that has that capability if and when we needed it, and also provide for future staff transition if we need to.
Is there anybody else that holds that license right now?
Not within the department, no.
No, none of those water licenses that those other guys are
No, it's
holding?
a different license,
It's a
so we would have
different
to
license.
outsource that capability, for instance, if all of a
Right.
sudden we lost our
Right.
cross-connection inspector. And we are looking at making 1 more water distribution operator position available to someone. Again, we're looking for staff, and that's a significant commitment. That's 11 weeks of time, 3 hours a night, off the clock. So it's really to take somebody who's willing to invest a significant amount of their own time
Right.
in obtaining the license. But
Okay.
beneficial for them and for us.
My last item, at the last meeting, our town engineer, Dan Murphy, had mentioned that he was working with the Federal Highway Administration for reimbursement on the October 11th snowstorm. We've been able to document some additional costs, and we're now up to about $184,000 of reimbursement that we're requesting. We're not going to guarantee we receive it all, but we had a good meeting with the representative from Mass DOT a couple of weeks ago, and we're optimistic we'll receive most of what we requested.
Awesome.
So I am done.
Beautiful. Mr. Feeney?
Go.
Go quick.
4 minutes.
Go.
Just a few items for the board. Current projects underway. We installed a new two-way valve up at Pine Hole Pool. Some of the overflow for the drainage for the main pool was going into our Orchard Road pump station and taxing that system running all the time, especially during off-season when it's just surface water running off into the pool. So we installed a two-way valve and tied it into our detention basin water system up there that we put in when we did the parking lots. So in the off-season, we'll be putting that clean water into our detention basin, and then during pool operations, we'll be turning that valve and actually putting that dirty water and dechlorinated water into our sewer system. So it's just something to save a little money and help the life expectancy of that pump station. Also, the guys have been doing plow route maintenance, going through all the plow routes, taking down limbs for the past few weeks. We haven't done that in a little while. Doing street signs, identifying catch basins and other items on the street. So we have a list compiled, so when the weather gets nicer out, especially catch basin repairs and stuff, we'll be have a list available and ready to go. Vehicle maintenance update, we actually distributed a checklist to all operators and to the foreman today to go out and start doing their daily maintenance inspections. Those will be handed in on a weekly basis and then obviously looked at by the garage foreman and reviewed, and any obviously emergency items that need to be addressed immediately, we will be doing so. And I'm actually still with Mark working on getting that other items inputted into the impulse maintenance system. So I'm probably going to be doing that by the end of the week. Just been a little busy, so haven't been able to get to that portion of the program, but we are moving ahead. One other item, the Town Hall RTU project. The installation of that new rooftop unit took place on December 15th. Took roughly about 6 hours. We had a crane in place, took the old unit off, put the new unit in. Total cost of that project roughly around $22,000. Total budget for that project was about $30,000. I'm actually looking to install some other points on our energy management system to finish out that project. How was that for quick?
Beautiful.
Nice.
Good.
You're a minute early.
Yep.
Well, I have one more item next. Well, next item on the agenda was the police station fire alarm bid. Bids were open on Wednesday, December 10th at 10 a.m. We only received 2 bids for that project, Amp Electric for $61,724, and then we had Goodless Electric Incorporated for $26,980. As you guys, I believe, know, the budget for that project was $25,000. I did inform capital and actually appropriations that there was a shortfall of about $1,980 for that project. And I know over the past few years we have asked for about $30,000. So we're actually going to be taking that shortfall out of operating, but advise them that we did initiate and request the $30,000 to begin with, and just to let them know we're taking the shortfall out of our operational to continue with the project.
Out of our budget?
Yes.
Not the police department budget?
No. The maintenance budget. Building maintenance budget.
A similar approach we took with the failed water tank at the Birchland School, where we advised appropriations up front that for the time being we will carry in our budget, but if we get closer to the end of the year and we feel that we're not able to complete the year, we will likely have to go back and look for a reserve account transfers to make us whole. So it's key to put them on notice, when it happens, so. it
I'll make
doesn't
a
surprise them.
motion to award the police station fire alarm to Goodless Electric Company for $26,980, 25 from the budgeted project and 1,980 shortfall from our operating budget.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any other business?
Next meeting, probably.
Next meeting?
2 Tuesdays from now would be the 20th, 3 Tuesdays would be the 27th, if we want
I'll
to.
be away the 20th
Okay.
of that week.
So you want to shoot for 27th?
27th, good for me.
Okay,
Works for me.
Okay.
beautiful thing.
Make a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
How's that, 5:40?